another juicy conversation, my beautiful co-creator. Today I'm with Marilyn Schlitz, and she is actually a pioneer and a leader in the consciousness research. And we're here at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, at least one of the branches from my understanding. And you are the CEO and the president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. What a delight to have you, because it is important to back all this information up by some research, because some tremendous things are happening right now in the world. On the Juicy Tour, we're interviewing all those amazing people, but you have so much knowledge. I was so, knowledge also opens a spiritual door. It opens, it unleashes energy. It allows us to unlock our human potential too. And you've been very, very interested all your life about this topic, haven't you?
I have. It's been a wonderful journey, and I'm delighted to have you here.
Oh, thank you. So tell us, what is noetic science? What does it mean, first of all?
Well, the word noetic comes from the Greek nous, which basically means direct knowing, our intuitive knowing as compared to our rational intellectual knowing. The Institute of Noetic Sciences was founded in 1973 by the Apollo 14 astronaut, Edgar. And Edgar had been the person who manned the little lunar module that went from the Apollo capsule to the moon. He had his historic walk on the moon. And then he describes his part of the mission being complete, so he had the window seat on the way home. And he had this opportunity to look out at planet Earth, suspended in the vastness of space, and to see it in its pristine wholeness, its beauty. It's an image that we've come to take for granted now, but it was very unique at that time. And he had sort of two epiphanies. The first was this kind of wonder and awe of the fundamental interconnectedness of all of life, the molecules in his body being part of the Big Bang and the whole universe. The second epiphany for him was of suffering. He looked at planet Earth and he saw the beauty, and he recognized that there was nothing inherent about Earth that caused the kind of pain and difficulty that we experience on a routine basis. He didn't find nationalistic boundaries or state boundaries or race boundaries or ethnic boundaries or political boundaries. There was just this whole beautiful system, and yet we experience suffering on a routine basis. And so his insight was that perhaps the great frontier isn't outer space, but really inner space, and understanding how our beliefs, our values, our worldviews inform the ways in which we relate to one another. So he started the Institute of Noetic Sciences to really bring together this noetic, deep knowing that comes from, the spiritual traditions, with then the rigor and discernment that comes from science, such that we could really begin to understand the powers and potentials that lie within us to affect positive change for the world.
And that goes through healing, doesn't it? There's some healing that is needed here on the planet for that to occur, for the boundaries to be removed, for the suffering to go. Tell us about the difference and how you see the difference between healing and curing, and what is your view on healing?
Well, I think that when we talk about noetic sciences, it is the relationship between the inner and the outer. And one place that we see that most clearly is in the context of healing. And we can think about healing as something that restores that state of integrity within us. So the right balance. When our body is functioning optimally, all the cells and the organs are kind of coordinated in a way that is effective. And that can be both healing and curing. We can see that when we have a cut and the wound heals, that's an example of a cure, the way in which the physical system corrects itself. But we can also think about healing at other levels. We can think about it at the mind-body level, the way in which our responses to life's stresses can create illness within us. And so how do we recognize that we have control over how we respond to stress? And then to begin to measure the ways in which our thoughts, our beliefs, our attitudes influence our state of physical well-being. But it's also then bigger than that. It's our relationships, and how do we heal our relationships so that we are nurturing to one another, that we bring these qualities of empathy and compassion that are about right relationship. And we know from the science that relationship is fundamental to optimal healing and optimal wellness. And then it's bigger than that. It's the idea that we're embedded within a social system and that it's hard to be healthy in a sick society. So how do we bring this lens of noetic sciences to understanding that we need to shift our social institutions, our schools, our hospitals, our businesses, so that we're supporting the integrity of life and that wholeness that comes with healing. And then I think we can also think about it in terms of our relationship to the environment and all the ways in which we have disconnected as we've built a worldview or a model of reality that is about an objective world out there. We've disconnected ourselves from that world. And so how do we begin to restore that sense of right relationship, recognizing that we're a fundamental part of a living system? And then finally, I think that it's also about our relationship to the broader kind of transpersonal or spiritual aspect. There's something bigger than ourselves. And when we connect to that bigger something, it can bring about a kind of healing. It can restore our sense of integrity, that there is right relationship for us in the context of, the broader cosmos. So healing is a very powerful and important way in which to understand who we are, how we are with each other, and what is the way in which we want to be as citizens of planet Earth.
So can we heal at all levels simultaneously, or do we have to really start with ourselves, or can we start on a spiritual journey and then start that healing that then brings us? How does this work? What is the research that you are looking at found? What did you find?
Well, healing and the way... Well, there's so many different ways to approach a question.
Yeah.
I think that when we talk about the science tends to be reductionistic. So we're interested in looking at what are the pieces that we can measure. And there's also more holistic science where we're trying to bring it all together and kind of looking at the general system of whatever it is we're studying. But I think that it's both. It's recognizing that our inner state, our inner experience, influences how we respond to the outer world. We know that stress, for example, is one of the most detrimental things for our bodies. And yet what's stressful to one person may be, enhancing of life for another. And that comes from the way we see it. It comes from our worldview, our lens of perception about how we judge what happens to us in our lives. So I think it's really important to recognize that our inner state and the inner capacities within us influence how we respond to the outer world. It's also true that the outer world influences our inner experience. If we're constantly being bombarded by weapons of mass distraction, the kind of complexities of life in the 21st century, it can make it very hard for us to find that place of stillness that allows us to access that deeper, wisdom within us. So I think the work of the Institute of Noetic Sciences is about inner transformation. How do we find the skills and capacities within us to be resilient in the face of the storm of complexity in our times? And it's also about how we leverage individual actions to help facilitate a tipping point in our society and in our culture.
So what are your recommendations right now in this time of change, actually, for everybody viewing right now? What is your recommendation on how we should be or look at things or heal ourselves so we can really be full citizen of this big universe that is not asking us to do anything, but that we feel that, a lot of us want and feel the urgency of participating in the transformation of this earth. So what are your practices or recommendations or way of viewing things so that we can help and be here?
Good question. Beautiful question. I think there are a lot of things that we can do, some that are simple. One thing is that people tend to be pretty hard on themselves. We're overwhelmed, and sometimes we think we're the only ones that are overwhelmed, or that we're not responding with the kind of purpose or resilience that we want. And so we can beat ourselves up for that. I think one of the most important things is for people to recognize that we're not alone. that we're all experiencing something that is unprecedented in the history of civilization. Never before have we had so many worldviews, belief systems, ways of knowing about reality converging and conflicting. And each of us is responsive to that. So I guess the first step is to be kind to ourselves and to recognize that we're not in it alone. Another thing I think we can do is begin to cultivate practices that will allow us to be more resilient in the face of change. Simple things, remembering to breathe, breathe deeply. This doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't require advanced degrees. Just requires settling ourselves and finding a moment to bring balance into our lives. I think simple things like walking in nature, reminding ourselves of the interconnectedness, practicing right relationship. And that doesn't mean that, we have to go through couples therapies or anything like that. I think it's the daily practices of kindness to somebody that we don't know. And also kindness to the people that are most challenging to us. How do we treat the everyday encounters we have, whether it's in our families or our workplace? How do we treat those as opportunities to transform and grow, and to bring the mindfulness that is important for good relationship into all of those encounters? And in particular, then, to begin to check, where do we get reactive? Where are we responding without mindfulness? So those are some of the simple practices. We've done a lot of research on consciousness transformation, decades, and we've looked at what are the catalysts of consciousness transformation, and also what are the barriers, what inhibits our capacity to make these changes. Out of that, we've created a change model that starts with these noetic direct experiences of something, that opens us. And it can be painful. It can be, the death of a loved one, the loss of a job. It can be something very disruptive. But it can also be an epiphany that we have when we're out in nature or with someone we care about. So these kind of noetic openings can lead us to begin to search for something more. But searching can be, something that becomes the end in itself. And so it's, how do you do that without getting distracted by the search? How do you use our learning and our engagement with others as a way of broadening our understanding of ourselves? And then when we did our research, the one part of our project was to interview masters from 60 different world traditions about what were the qualities that facilitated transformations in consciousness. And one of the things that they identified, almost all of them, the vast majority, I would say 99.9% of them, said that finding a practice becomes really important. And you can think, we interviewed, Catholic priests and pagan witches and, Buddhist monks. And so what do those various practices have in common? And we found 4 things. The ability to set intention. I want to bring these life experiences into a form that allows me to better myself. So the intention. But we know that intention alone isn't enough. The road to hell is paved with good intention. So how do we then begin to funnel that or harness that? Another thing about practices is attention. Where are we placing our attention? Is it on all the ways in which the world is doing us wrong? Or is it on, what can I do right now in this moment to be a better citizen? Where am I placing my attention? And all of the practices have skills and capacities that they can help develop within us. A third thing is repetition. Bringing new habits into our lives. And we know that our brains lay down these neural pathways, and that they're kind of grooves in our brains that make whatever our practice is easier to do. It's kind of like driving in the snow and there are these ruts, and our tires get stuck in the ruts and it's hard to get out of them. These transformative practices allow us to build new grooves in the brain.
So that's neuroplasticity, huh?
That's right. Our brain has the capacity to change, even late in life. And so as we're building these new capacities through these transformative practices, we can build new habits and more functional, more beneficial, more nurturing and healing habits. The fourth thing is guidance. It's really important to know that there are other people who have calibrated the path before us, and I think the people you're interviewing are those kind of people who have insights for us. But it's also important to know that we don't have to take the source of authority outside of ourselves. So as we build these transformative capacities, the ability to look within ourselves, to breathe, to find the wisdom within, the guidance can come from ourselves. And as we slow down enough to listen, there's a lot of truth within us. And so I like to think about those 4 qualities as the elements of transformative practice, all wrapped in the arms of surrender. Because ultimately, consciousness transformation isn't about something profoundly different out there. It's about our response to what is so. And then finally, in terms of this journey of the change model, it was very clear that we need to get off the pillow and out into the world. And we need to find other people that we can travel with, because that helps us to remember when we forget, and to help us to maintain our sense of integrity as we're moving forward. And one of the big things we found as kind of a consequence of these transformative practices is that we move from this sense of me, it's all about my journey, my path, my practice, to a real mindful we. How is it that we're co-collaborating to create something that's more just, compassionate, and sustainable? And that ultimately leads to living deeply, these rich, juicy lives that you're exploring.
So, and that's really for you. That's your life. You're living a juicy life. I mean, you must be exposed to so much information, and throughout your research, how did your own life, transform? Have you always been that way? Have you always? Tell us about your story a little bit.
All right, I'd be happy to. I grew up a kid in Detroit, Michigan during the 60s and 70s. It was a time when the world was in crisis. Certainly the United States was at war with itself. It was a race war, it was a class war, and ultimately I came to see it as a consciousness war, a paradigm war, conflict. And as a kid, I had no sense that I had any ability to make a change in that world, but I started getting interested in things like, saving the whales, or there were things that, kids reach out to do to feel engaged. And I did some of those things, but I also was pretty unconscious for a lot of the time. And it was when I got into college that I discovered 2 books. The first was by Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And that book really liberated me, because it said that the model of reality that we're living in isn't fixed or absolute, and that in fact, even in science, it has changed fundamentally over time. And what that meant to me is that we weren't stuck with what was so dysfunctional about what was happening, but that there were capacities we had to change. And the second book I read was by Edgar Mitchell, The Apollo 14 Astronaut, published by the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Yeah. And it was about how consciousness is that next frontier, and that when we're thinking about a paradigm shift, it's really about understanding what is the nature of our inner experience, and what are the capacities we have, not only within this encapsulated mind-body self, but also to reach out and interact with other people, and even at a distance. So how powerful consciousness can be in influencing other people even at a distance. So that was extremely interesting to me, and it started me on a journey. I ended up in, colleges and universities and research centers all over the world. Have done many, many research projects during that time. And I do feel like I have a rich and juicy life. I every day am grateful for the fact that I have so many extraordinary experiences, and people that I'm in contact with, and teachers who've impacted me, and, people who are doing great work in the world who are sharing these stories in a way that can empower each of us.
So who are some of your, not heroes, but who are some of your favorite people right now on the planet that you really think are highly contributing to evolution of consciousness and to these times?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. There's so many teachers that impress me and have impacted me. Many of them we would never have heard of. I remember when I was doing my PhD thesis, and I was interested in the folk medicine, and there was a lady there who was the cook in the kitchen for the college that I was working at, and I mentioned to her that I was studying the bush medicines, and she went out and she collected all these plants for me, and she labeled each and every one of them, and it was her humility and her lack of pretentiousness that inspired me. And so it's the sort of everyday folk who are living their lives with integrity that really inspire me. But then there are the superstars as well. There are people like Deepak Chopra. And Deepak is a close friend and great ally. And I've learned a tremendous amount from him, with him, about how it is that we can balance our lives and we can find ways to be mindful, be contemplative, but also be out in the world and engaged. And Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, his journey was courageous. You know, if you've seen the movie Apollo 13, you know that it was a near disaster. So here was a man who trusted so much in the Newtonian classical physical model that he got on this rocket the size of the Empire State Building and blasted off into outer space with the idea that he was contributing to a new vision for humanity. And then to have the additional courage to break away from that strictly physical model and say, life is more than that. Reality is more than that. That we are physical beings, certainly, but we're also spiritual beings, and that we're social beings. And how is it that we can take those various aspects or facets of ourselves and combine them so that we can live better, juicier lives?
This is all exciting. I mean, this is what life is about. Sharing this kind of information, to me at least right now, sharing this kind of information, sharing this juiciness about all these wonderful people and seeing ourselves in them and allowing ourselves to live this leadership, because I really feel there's a new type of leadership that is emerging too, isn't it? Are you seeing that through your research too?
You know, we have opportunities to work with youth. One of the programs that we built out of our research program is what we call worldview literacy. And it's working with young people, K through 12, primarily in the high schools right now. But hearing the wisdom of these 15 to 18-year-olds who really are experiencing a different world than any of us, older population grew up in. So these digital natives who are really wired to connect and who are hearing a lot of the stories about the way in which what we have built for them is dysfunctional, and their readiness to make a difference in the world. I'm also hearing a lot of them, as they're organizing their lives to be active in the world, recognizing how important those inner capacities are. And so there's this ability to manage the inner wisdom with the impulse to act in the world that is coming from this next generation. And I will tell you, that is a thrill to be in their presence and hear their passion for life.
And there's the newborn ones that seem totally out of this world too. There's some things circulating on the internet, or it's just like you can feel their wisdom and their connection to spirit. They're open channels. They're just living it. They're being it. When we're kids, we are that, aren't we? We're each and everything.
Yeah, I tell the story about my son when he was about 3. I had just lost a very close friend of mine, and he had been part of that process with her dying. And one night we were driving in the car, and it was a full moon. And I said to my son, I'm like, look, look at that beautiful full moon. Isn't this a glorious night to be alive? And he said, well, what do you mean, Mommy? Do you think dead people can't see the full moon? And I said, I guess not. I guess I think dead people can't see the full moon. And he's like, oh, no, Mommy. He said, Elizabeth's up there right now, and she's singing, enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. And I was just, I had to stop in my tracks and think, out of the mouth of babes comes this tremendous insight. And then, he's now 12, and I asked him, do you remember that? And he doesn't. There's a way in which we grow out of this openness. So I think one of our challenges and our opportunities is how to help young people stay open, because there are so many barriers to this kind of transformation. There are the physical barriers of too much information coming in and too much overwhelm for these young people. There are psychological barriers. Our value systems and what we're brought up to believe impact what we're capable of seeing. And we've seen this again, time and time again in the science, that if you select people who have certain values and you present them with identical data, they will hear it differently based on their preconceived assumptions. And so how do you help young people to stay aware of that and to remain humble in the face of what seems like dogmatic assertion? And we're also discovering from the neurosciences that we're actually hardwired to resist new information. If information comes in that supports our preconceived hypotheses, the learning centers of the brain light up. But if information comes in that refutes our hypothesis or refutes our assumptions, the warning center of the brain lights up, and we actually shut down the integration of that new information. As we learn more about that, we can help young people to stay open, to maintain that cognitive agility that will allow them to be, more adaptive, more creative, more able to engage with people of difference whose worldviews and assumptions may be fundamentally different from their own. And to me, the big challenge of the 21st century is that, we come with many different worldviews, many different belief systems. There's a way in which intolerance characterizes the day. How do young people, how do all of us at all ages, but in particular this generation that's growing up right now and will become our leaders, how do we help them to see that there's integrity in these different points of view, and that when difference meets, creative new solutions can emerge from that? So that's, to me, the exciting sort of next frontier.
So are you actually putting some structures in place within the system or other institutes?
The Institute of Noetic Sciences is creating a curriculum around this idea of worldview literacy, really helping young people to understand that they have a worldview or a lens of perception through which they see the world, and that it's not conscious, that we are so habituated to that worldview that we see from it and we don't then reflect on it. So we're giving them skills through these lesson plans that help them to just shake it up a little bit and to see things a little differently. And last year we piloted the project with 1,500 students. This year we're going out for a much bigger program. Our goal is to bring the multimedia lesson plans onto the internet and to scale it so that we can participate in classrooms all over the world.
And finally, tell us about other projects that you're involved with that you really believe in right now that can make a tremendous impact, and how we can participate maybe in that.
Well, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has sort of three components to our work. The first is the basic science. We're really interested in understanding how it is that we can measure and better appreciate the complexities of consciousness. And so in our laboratory, we are able to do studies looking at the interconnectedness of different isolated systems. Excuse me. So one of the things we've been studying is the possibility that one person's intention can actually have a measurable impact on another person's physiology at a distance. And the reason that's important is because it reveals the interconnectedness of our, intention of one person with the physical well-being of another. And we've done dozens and dozens of projects now looking at various aspects of this entanglement or interconnectedness. The second level of our work is the applications. How do we take what we're learning about these powers and potentials of our consciousness and our latent abilities into applied settings? So we created a program at the homeless shelter here in Petaluma where it's called At Home Within, really helping people to develop the inner capacities that will better allow them to navigate the challenges in their lives. We're also adapting it to the Worldview Literacy Project, creating educational programs that also have a research component. We're interested in seeing if having these skills and having these situations in the classroom improves academic performance. So those are some real world applied things. The third level is our outreach to the world, and we are virtual and global, and we have a membership of people who are like-minded, who are interested in engaging these questions together. We have a website that is filled to the brim with fascinating materials, interviews with all kinds of amazing leaders. Some of the findings from our research are posted there. And there are venues for people to engage in their own work with each other. So one of the things we've been doing is posting big questions and inviting people in community groups all over the world to meet with each other in proximity, and then to share their insights on the internet so that it becomes a global conversation. And I think that people through the Institute of Noetic Sciences, through this kind of program that you're doing, through the kind of insights that are coming from a variety of different perspectives, whether it's research or fiction, major motion pictures, there's a way in which the culture is shifting, and people are starting to appreciate how important this is. And so what gives me hope is that we really, truly are at a tipping point. For more than 100 years, scientists have been interested in looking at these extrasensory capacities. Over time, we've identified a number of populations that seem to do better under laboratory circumstances. And they seem to be people who meditate, martial artists, and classically trained musicians. So you could say, well, what is it about those populations that allows them to do better in the laboratory? And I think it has to do with their capacity to focus attention, but also to maintain a broader field of perception. So if you think about somebody who's performing in a symphony, they can perform their lines in the symphony, but they also have to be tracking the larger gestalt. And so what we see is that these people who can meditate, for example, have the capacity to quiet their minds, to focus their awareness, but also to maintain a kind of perception of a bigger field of possibility. Martial artists, it's all about that capacity to maintain the focus, stay in the now, but also to be tracking everything that's happening around you. So these qualities are things that we can develop within ourselves, and I think they're things that each of us has the capacity to live into.
It's exciting because even remote viewing has been used by the government, hasn't it? But we don't really speak about that. They don't speak so much about it, but there are some people now coming out and saying how their contribution to the government to know where the enemies were, to know their strategies, there's infinite amount of information that we can access through remote viewing. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's mind-blowing.
There has been a sustained program sponsored by the government of the United States to look at things like remote viewing, and also to look at the idea of mind over matter, the capacity of people to influence objects or events at a distance. That program shut down, but there is still a tremendous amount of interest, and we don't know what's happening in classified segments, but there was a lot of research done and a lot of application work done under very complex circumstances where there was a need for intelligence gathering. And if this is something that can help boost the magnitude of the effect and to increase the reliability of the information, it seems like we should be taking advantage of all of these tools and technologies, even when they don't always make sense given sort of the classic model of physics.
Is there a little exercise that we can do to kind of boost our remote viewing capacities?
I think the most important thing people can do is just try it. I mean, have direct noetic experiences. There's simple little ways that you can practice this. Invite a friend to go out to a location and then sit down in a quiet place and describe what's going on for them. It doesn't work all the time. There may be distractions, there may be things that prevent us from being connected to that person, but more often than not, you'll find that there are very striking similarities between your inner experience, the kind of images or awarenesses that come up, with then the geographic location and the physical characteristics of that site. Those things sort of boost our confidence and give us a sense of possibility. And I think once we've opened the crack a little bit for these kinds of possibilities, it expands our ability to live into them, because it becomes something that's within our grasp. If we're constantly being told you can't, you won't, you don't, we shut down. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we're invited to explore and express and create, it's empowering.
We are at a tipping point, and this is fabulous to have people like you sharing this information to help us move through this tipping point, because it could be scary at times and exciting, and it's very, very thrilling to be on this planet right now. So thank you for all your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for having such a juicy life that it takes you around to places like here in Petaluma, California.
Oh, Petaluma, this is rich in conversation and in people in this area. This is fantastic. If you guys have time, you have to come to the Chi Center and to the Institute of Noetic Science. You organize retreats and all kind of things. And I know there's another big event in San Francisco in July that you're organizing. Can you just two little things?
We have a beautiful retreat center, a 200-acre campus, where we invite people to come and experience their own transformations through a variety of different kinds of programs. We also offer educational and collaborative venues all over the world. We have our big international biannual conference coming up in San Francisco in July. And if people are interested, they can just go to our website, noetic.org. We invite everyone to come and participate. It is really, I think, when people come together, share ideas, share inspiration, that they find the courage to make the changes that are needed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Much love, my beautiful co-creator. Another juicy interview, I told you. Bye.